At Clarence House, on the third floor of the private East Wing, there is a small oak desk that has belonged to Charles for almost 40 years. It is the desk his mother had given him when he became Prince of Wales. It is the desk he had signed his coronation papers on. And it is the desk where, on Tuesday morning at 11 o'clock, he signed his own final estate decision, a document he had prepared quietly with his personal solicitor for the previous 6 months. Charles had not told his wife what he was signing. He had not told his sister. He had not told his son. He had signed the paper alone, placed it in the drawer, and closed the drawer gently. Later that afternoon, William and Anne received their summaries, and what William and Anne did next stunned the entire palace. Prince William and Princess Anne traveled to Clarence House together on Thursday morning. The Prince and the Princess Royal did not come with aides. They did not come with legal briefings. They came only with a shared decision, agreed the previous evening at Kensington Palace over a quiet cup of tea, and one specific request they had both signed on to together. When they walked into Charles's study and sat down across from him, the king had expected them to want more strictness. He had expected them to want more exclusion. He had prepared himself, quietly, for a conversation about how carefully his estate decision had preserved the direct line. Music instead, William looked at his father and said, "Leave one door open for her." And Charles closed his eyes for a very long moment. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to like this video and subscribe so you do not miss a single update. Charles had signed the estate decision at 11 o'clock in the morning. The king had prepared the document with careful discretion for almost 6 months. A final estate decision, in simple words, is a formal legal document that sets out how a member of the royal family's private property and personal assets will be handled after their death. Charles had wanted his own decision to reflect the same careful planning his mother had shown in her private arrangements. He had studied her structures. He had learned from her patience. And he had made his own decisions with the same quiet clarity she had used. The estate decision had, over its many pages, structured Charles's private property into a small, careful trust that would pass, on his death, to William and William's children. It included a private country residence Charles had purchased in his own name in the early years of his marriage to Camilla. It included a small collection of private art. It included a modest personal fund that had grown over the years from his private earnings, and it included a specific clause, added at the end, that explicitly named Camilla as excluded from any beneficial interest in the trust. Charles had not been cruel in drafting the clause. He had only been thorough. He had followed his mother's model, and he had assumed quietly that this was what the family would want. William received his summary at 2:30 on Tuesday afternoon. The prince had been in a small meeting at Kensington when his private secretary handed him the sealed envelope. William read the summary once. He read it a second time. And by the third reading, the prince had begun to feel something he had not expected to feel about his father's decision. Discomfort. William did not respond immediately. He placed the summary inside his private drawer, closed the drawer gently, and returned to his meeting without saying a word. But for the rest of the afternoon, the discomfort did not leave him. Anne received her summary at Gatcombe Park that same evening. The Princess Royal had been out riding when the letter arrived, and she opened it in her small study once the horses had been settled for the night. Anne read the summary once, folded it once, and set it down on her desk. The Princess Royal did not react immediately. She only walked to the small window of her study, looked out at the darkening pasture and thought carefully. Anne understood what her brother was trying to do. She understood the careful lineage of his reasoning. And she also understood quietly that something in the decision was not quite right. The strictness had exceeded the situation. And Anne knew, even without speaking to William, that her nephew was probably feeling the same thing. William called Anne at 9 o'clock on Wednesday morning. The prince did not begin with a greeting. He only said, "Did you read it?" Anne said yes. William said, "Do you think it needs a small change?" Anne said yes. William said, "Will you come to Clarence House with me?" Anne said yes. And that was the entire conversation. Neither of them said anything about Camilla by name. Neither of them said anything about the strictness of the exclusion clause. They only agreed in 3 short exchanges that a small correction was needed and that they would ask for it together. William and Anne met at Kensington Palace that Wednesday evening. Catherine met them at the door of the small green sitting room, offered them tea, and quietly excused herself. William did not ask her to stay. He did not need to. Catherine had spent the previous evening listening to William think through the decision, and she had understood without needing William to explain exactly what he was going to ask his father. William and Anne sat across from each other for almost 2 hours. They did not draft a formal proposal. They did not prepare talking points. They only agreed, in the quiet way that families sometimes agree, on the shape of the request they would make. And they agreed, more importantly, on the one sentence William would say. But to understand why William and Anne had chosen to respond to Charles's decision in a way no one in the palace had expected, the story had to be pulled backward to the small, quiet moments of the previous 12 months, when a series of private revelations had, one after another, drawn the boundaries of Camilla's place in the family more tightly than any single decision could ever have done alone. Charles had lived through all of them. William had watched all of them. Anne had helped shape several. And by the time Charles had signed his own final estate decision, William and Anne had reached the same quiet conclusion together. The line had been drawn firmly enough. It was time to leave one door open. The previous 12 months had been unusual for the royal family. According to a documented household briefing prepared by Charles's private secretary for the king's personal reference, the family had faced a series of quiet legal and personal revelations, each of which had touched the shape of Camilla's public and private role. There had been a private trust discovered inside the late Queen's papers. There had been a codicil uncovered during a routine will review. There had been letters and instructions surfaced across 3 separate archives. Each revelation had, in its own way, drawn a line around Diana's memory and around the direct line of succession. Each had left Camilla with less, and each had asked her to accept the drawing with grace. Camilla had accepted each revelation quietly. She had not fought a single one. She had not spoken publicly about any of them. She had not asked her office to brief a single journalist. According to a private household briefing prepared for Anne, Camilla had, over the previous year, cancelled 7 personal projects that had touched Diana's memory, released 2 patronages voluntarily before the palace had needed to ask, and had made a small, quiet gesture of stepping back from certain events where her presence had, in past years, been assumed. The Queen consort had not asked for credit. She had not asked for recognition. She had only done what she had believed the family needed her to do, and she had done it over and over without complaint. William had watched Camilla during those 12 months. The prince had not spoken about it publicly. He had not mentioned it privately to Charles. But William had, in his quiet, careful way, noticed the small ways his stepmother had accepted every drawing of the line. He had noticed that Camilla had not defended herself when the newspapers had written about the exclusions. He had noticed that she had continued to attend her scheduled engagements as if nothing had changed. And he had noticed, most of all, that Camilla had, at every private family gathering during the year, sat quietly beside Charles without saying a single word about the losses. William had understood, slowly, that something in Camilla had earned her dignity in a way the family had not fully acknowledged. Anne had watched the same thing from a different angle. The Princess Royal had, over the previous 12 months, worked closely with Camilla on a small handful of ceremonial matters that did not touch Diana's memory. Anne had found her sister-in-law to be careful, respectful, and unwilling to overreach into any area the family had signaled was closed to her. Anne had watched Camilla decline 3 small opportunities to expand her public role, quietly, without any explanation, because Camilla had understood that the family was drawing lines and that she should not cross them. Anne had not said anything to Camilla about the acceptance. She had only quietly formed her own view, and that view had been forming slowly into a small, quiet respect. The residence that would become the subject of William and Anne's request was a small country house Charles had purchased in his own name in 2007. According to a documented account later shared with Anne by the senior partner at Charles's private solicitors, the house was a modest 3-bedroom property on the edge of a small village in the Cotswolds, purchased quietly at auction, and used by Charles and Camilla as a private weekend retreat during the years before Charles became king. Camilla had loved the house. She had gardened its small kitchen garden herself. She had personally chosen the paint colors for the guest bedroom, and she had spent, over the years, many quiet weekends there when the demands of the royal calendar had allowed her to rest. Music. It was that specific house, and only that house, that William and Anne would ask Charles to preserve for Camilla. William and Anne had chosen the house carefully. They had not asked for anything larger. They had not asked for anything of ceremonial significance. They had not asked for anything connected to Diana's memory. They had asked only for the one small property that had been genuinely Camilla's, in the way that mattered most, the way she had lived in it, tended it, and made it feel like a home. William had believed, quietly, that a family that had drawn every other line firmly could afford to leave that one door open. Anne had agreed. And when they met at Kensington on Wednesday evening, the shape of their request had become clear. They would ask Charles to preserve the Cotswolds house for Camilla's lifetime use, quietly, without any beneficial interest that would violate the trust structure, but with a full personal courtesy that would allow her to visit and stay whenever she wished, until her own death. Charles greeted William and Anne at the door of his study on Thursday morning. The king had expected them. His private secretary had confirmed the meeting the previous afternoon, but Charles had not been told the specific subject of the conversation. He had assumed it was a routine follow-up on the estate decision. He had assumed his son and his sister were there to add their formal agreement to the document. He had assumed they would discuss the specific clauses, review the trust structure, and confirm the shape of the arrangement together. Charles had prepared quietly for that conversation. He had not prepared for the one he was about to have. William did not begin with pleasantries. The prince closed the door of the study behind Anne, walked directly to the chair across from Charles's desk, and sat down. Anne sat beside him. William did not open a folder. He did not read from any prepared statement. William simply looked at his father and said, "We have both read the summary. We agree with your reasoning, but we are asking you to leave one door open for her." Charles did not respond immediately. The king looked at his son, then at his sister, then back at his son, and Charles asked one question. Charles asked, "For whom?" William answered honestly. William said, "For Camilla." Charles closed his eyes for a very long moment. The king had not anticipated the request. He had expected William and Anne to want stricter exclusion, not gentler. He had expected them to defend the direct line, not to ask for a courtesy toward the woman who had married outside of it. And yet, sitting across from his son and his sister on a Thursday morning at Clarence's house, Charles heard the request clearly and understood immediately what it meant. William and Anne had watched Camilla accept every loss of the past year with dignity, and they had together decided that dignity had earned her a single small door. Anne spoke next. The Princess Royal did not raise her voice. Anne only said calmly that Camilla had accepted every decision of the past year without complaint, without public commentary, and without any attempt to work around what the family had asked of her. Anne said that Mother's wisdom about the direct line had been correct, and would remain correct, but that Mother had also always believed in a small measure of courtesy toward the people who accepted their place gracefully. Anne said quietly that they were not asking Charles to change the structure of his estate. They were asking him to keep one door open for the woman who had learned, over the previous year, exactly which doors were closed. Charles listened, and Charles did not answer at first. William then made the specific request. The prince explained the small Cotswolds house. He explained that Camilla had gardened it, tended it, made it a home. He explained that the house was not connected to Diana's memory, to the direct line, or to any ceremonial matter. William asked that the estate decision be revised in one small way. He asked that the house be preserved for Camilla's lifetime use, without any beneficial interest that would violate the trust structure, but with a full personal courtesy that would allow her to stay whenever she wished, for as long as she lived. Charles listened carefully. The king did not interrupt, and when William finished speaking, Charles asked only one question. Charles asked, "Is this your decision or hers?" William answered honestly. William said, "She does not know we are here." Charles asked for 48 hours. The king said he needed the time to think about the request carefully and to consult his personal solicitor about the specific legal shape of a lifetime use provision. William and Anne agreed without pressing further. They stood up from the chairs across from Charles's desk, walked to the door of the study together, and left Clarence's house without another word. Music. Charles sat alone at his desk for almost 3 hours after they had gone. The king did not weep. He did not react outwardly at all. He simply sat, with the estate decision open in front of him on the desk, and thought about the woman who had married him 20 years earlier, and the year she had just endured, and the small door his son and his sister had asked him to leave open for her. And by the end of the 3rd hour, Charles had begun to understand what he was going to do. Charles called his personal solicitor on Friday morning. The king asked him to draft a small revision to the estate decision. Charles specified the residence by name and address. He specified the shape of the lifetime use provision. He specified that the provision would exist as a personal courtesy from Charles to Camilla, separate from the main trust structure, and that it would end at Camilla's death without any onward beneficial interest. The solicitor prepared the revision within 2 hours. Charles reviewed it that afternoon. He signed it in a small, quiet ceremony at his desk, with only his private secretary present as witness. And when the revision was placed inside the original file at the end of the day, Charles closed the drawer with a very different feeling from the one he had felt on Tuesday morning. Charles called William that Friday evening. The king did not begin with pleasantries. He simply said, "It is done." William did not need to ask what his father meant. The prince only said quietly, "Thank you." Charles said, "Thank you for asking." And that was the entire conversation. Anne received a similar call at Gatcombe Park an hour later. The Princess Royal did not react outwardly. She only said, "Good," and she went back to her small study without another word about the matter. Camilla was told about the revision on Saturday morning. Charles told her himself, in the private sitting room at Clarence's house, over a small breakfast tray. The king did not begin with the estate decision. He began instead with a simple sentence. Charles said, "I have made a small change to the arrangements. It concerns the Cotswolds house." Camilla did not speak for a long moment. The queen consort set down her cup. She folded her hands in her lap, and she waited. Charles told her the shape of the revision, gently, without any drama. He told her the house would remain available to her for the rest of her life, quietly, as a personal courtesy from him, whenever she wished to visit or stay. Camilla listened without interrupting. Camilla began to cry when Charles finished speaking. The queen consort did not sob. She did not shake. She only allowed one tear to fall, and then another, and she did not wipe them away. Camilla had not cried during any of the losses of the previous year. She had not cried when the trust had been revealed. She had not cried when the codicil had been uncovered. She had not cried when the patronages had been transferred to Catherine. She had accepted all of it with dignity. But the small courtesy of the Cotswolds house, offered to her quietly by her husband, without any formal ceremony, without any public announcement, broke something in Camilla that had been holding itself together for 12 long months, and she cried, gently, for perhaps 3 minutes, without saying anything. Camilla asked Charles one question when she had composed herself. She asked whether the revision had been his idea. Charles answered honestly. The king said no. He said that William and Anne had come to see him on Thursday morning and had asked him to leave one door open for her. Camilla did not react outwardly. She only looked at her husband for a long moment, then reached across the small breakfast table and briefly placed her hand on top of his. Charles did not move his hand. Camilla did not pull away. The two of them sat that way for perhaps 10 seconds. And then Camilla said very quietly that she would like to thank William and Anne, in person herself. Charles said, of course. Camilla traveled to Kensington Palace that Sunday afternoon. The Queen Consort came alone without her private secretary, without any household staff, and without any car crest displayed on the vehicle. William met her at the door of the small green sitting room. Catherine did not join them. William and Camilla sat down across from each other, in front of a small tea service with the door closed behind them. Camilla did not begin with a speech. She did not begin with an apology. She only said quietly, "Thank you for asking your father." William did not respond immediately. The prince only nodded once. And then William said gently, "You have accepted so much this year. This was owed." Camilla did not cry. She only nodded. And she left the sitting room a few minutes later without another word. Camilla traveled to Gatcombe Park the following Tuesday. She met Anne in the small side study behind the main house. The two women sat down across from each other in silence for almost a full minute. Then Camilla said only, "Thank you." Anne nodded once. Anne said only, "It was the right thing." And that was the entire conversation. Camilla drove back to London that afternoon in silence. She did not tell anyone about either meeting for the rest of the week. She simply held them, quietly, inside herself, as a private matter of thanks that did not need to be shared with anyone else. The story reached the papers by the middle of the following week. The palace had not confirmed the specific contents of the estate decision. No aide had briefed any journalist. But by Wednesday morning, a single line began appearing on royal news pages across Britain. William and Anne asked King to preserve cottage for Camilla. A personal courtesy provision, in plain words, is a small clause in an estate arrangement that grants a specific personal use of a property separate from any beneficial interest as a matter of family respect. This one mattered because it did not attack anyone. It did not celebrate anyone. It simply reported the fact that Charles had made an estate decision, that William and Anne had asked for a small revision, and that Charles had agreed. A senior royal correspondent framed the story on the morning news with one careful sentence. This was the year the family remembered how to be kind. That single line traveled across the country within the hour. It gave the public the language to understand what William and Anne had done, without turning the story into a war or a triumph. The country did not need to choose between anyone. The country only needed to understand that a family that had spent 12 months drawing lines had, at the end of the year, chosen to leave one small door open. Outside Clarence House, a small crowd began to gather near the gates by mid-afternoon on Thursday. They came, most of them, carrying single sprigs of lavender. There were no signs. There were no chants. There was only the quiet placing of lavender along the grass near the fence. Clarence House mattered because it was the private residence Charles and Camilla had shared for many years, and the lavender on the grass carried a meaning older than the day's news. A woman standing near the gate spoke to a national broadcaster with one simple line. She said that every family needs one door left open. The broadcaster did not add commentary. It let the sentence stand. Public sentiment moved gently. The country did not celebrate. The country did not argue. The country only seemed to feel, quietly, that something the royal family had needed to do for a long time had finally been done, and that the doing had come from an unexpected direction. Catherine kept her scheduled engagement at a children's hospice on Friday afternoon, and spoke briefly about the importance of gentleness in family life. Catherine did not mention Camilla. Catherine did not mention William or Anne. She only spoke about the way that small acts of quiet kindness can, at the end of a difficult year, become the largest gift a family gives itself. That short message was noticed, and it defined the public mood for the rest of the day. Camilla appeared in public 2 weeks later. The Queen Consort attended a small charity event at St. James's Palace, wearing a small pearl brooch that Charles had gifted her the day after the revision had been signed. Camilla did not mention the brooch. Camilla did not mention the estate decision. She only smiled gently, greeted the guests, and did what she had always done best in her royal role. She was present. And her presence, on that particular afternoon, said everything the country needed to hear. Anne released a short line through her private office that evening. The Princess Royal said only that families sometimes remember, at the end of long years, that grace is not weakness. That sentence did not mention Camilla. It did not mention Charles. It did not mention William. But it defined the entire week for the palace. The palace confirmed a small institutional change on the third day. Going forward, all major estate decisions taken by senior members of the royal family would be reviewed before signing by at least 2 other senior members of the family in a small private meeting held for the purpose of ensuring that no decision, however carefully reasoned, missed the small gestures of courtesy that a family owes its members. A courtesy review, in plain terms, is a small internal step added to a formal legal process to ensure that human considerations are not lost inside careful legal reasoning. This change did not name Camilla. It did not name Charles. It did not name any specific decision. It simply added a small, quiet safeguard going forward that would keep the family from ever forgetting the lesson William and Anne had asked their father to remember. Charles signed the small protocol document alone in his study at Clarence House. The king did not call William. Charles did not call Anne. Charles simply signed the paper, placed it in the household record, and closed the drawer gently. The monarch did not feel loss. Charles felt, instead, the quiet weight of accepting that his son and his sister had understood something he had not fully seen. Careful decisions, drafted in the model of his mother's wisdom, could still miss the small gentleness a family needs to remain a family. Charles had missed it. William and Anne had caught it, and Charles was grateful quietly that they had. Camilla visited the Cotswolds house the following month. The Queen Consort traveled alone without any household staff and without any advance notice to the estate manager. She spent 2 quiet days there, walking in the small kitchen garden she had once tended, sitting in the guest bedroom she had once painted, and reading in the small sitting room she had once decorated. She did not take any photographs. She did not release any statement. She simply spent the 2 days in the small, quiet way she had learned to spend her time over the previous year. And when she left the house exactly as she had found it, ready for her next visit whenever the year would allow. The palace did not celebrate. The palace did not explain. The palace only continued. Charles had made his estate decision. William and Anne had asked for one small change. The change had been made. Camilla had accepted it with quiet gratitude. And beside all of it, standing quietly in a small 3-bedroom house on the edge of a Cotswolds village, was the truth the family had spent a full year working toward. Firmness protects the direct line. Grace protects the family. Both are needed. Neither can stand alone. William and Anne had understood this before Charles had. And in asking their father to leave one door open, they had reminded a royal family that had spent 12 months drawing lines that the last line, the most important line of all, is the one that keeps a family together at the end of every difficult year. Charles had drawn it. William and Anne had shown him where. Camilla had walked through it. And Britain, for one quiet fortnight, had watched a royal family remember that grace, offered at the right moment, can be more powerful than any legal instrument ever signed inside a private study. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next video.